Hello, hello, welcome everyone. We're super excited to talk to you all about XML and JSON this morning.
Yeah. Good morning, everybody. I'm Don, and and Dean, Elizabeth, and I are excited to be with you this morning to talk about a topic that's near and dear to our hearts, as you can tell from our lovely mugs that we use. Yeah. So.
I feel a little out this morning, just a black mug, but hoping to get my XML mug in the mail soon.
Oh, we can make that happen. There's some around here somewhere. Yeah. So yeah. No, good.
Awesome.
Yep. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for taking the time to join us, and we're looking forward to some of your questions.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. So, Elizabeth, it's 8 o'clock.
It is that time. All right. So before we dive into things, there are a couple different ways that you can ask questions this morning or this afternoon, wherever you're tuning in from. So the first way is in person over the air. So at any point, you can click that raise hand icon on your right panel, and we'll promote you to a panelist. At that point, you can unmute and share your webcam when we let you know we're ready for you, and then you can come on air and ask questions live with us. And then the other option is through text. So you can type your question into the question panel and hit send that way. And we'll do our best to get to as many questions as we can this morning. If we aren't able to get to your question, we will absolutely be sure to follow up after the webinar as well.
Yeah. Awesome. And any questions, good. Doesn't matter how high level or low level. Dean can go as deep as anybody really wants to, and I spend a lot of time working with Dean and Juan, but I think more at the higher level, as Dean does too. But this is a topic that's near and dear to our hearts, as anybody who's followed SAFE knows, and we really pride ourselves in our ability to work with XML and JSON and other open standards. So, Dean, do you want to say anything right off the top?
No, thank everybody for joining us, and we're excited about. And people might think we're a little odd or might need some help because we love JSON and XML, but one of the reasons we like it is because it does make the world of the web work and allows data to flow in data services around in a fairly open and accessible way, even if there can be some quirks for extracting what you need out of it, but that's why we have FME.
Yeah, that's right. So I think right out of the gate we have a poll, don't we, Elizabeth?
Yeah, we absolutely do. So I will launch that now here. And so we're going to be asking everyone, how important is XML or JSON to your organization? So we can see the results already coming in here. I'll give everyone about a minute to answer that one. Okay, it's seeming to be very important to people, so that's awesome.
Yeah. Wow, and this is a great group, so that's awesome. So so I guess we share that, do we, somehow?
Yeah, we'll close that down in just a second here.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, so that's wow. So look at that, like 85% XML and JSON is important. So so that's great. So one of the things right out of the top before we start getting into questions is that this is the beginning of a discussion for sure. So if you don't, as you go back to your work and you want to, oh darn, I wish I had to add that, or geez, I don't know how to read that XML or JSON. Follow up with us, support@safe.com, and then Dean and his team will be the ones who are there to help. And that's one of the things at SAFE we really pride ourselves on. So we have our first question.
We do.
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, so our first question is, where do you see XML and JSON technology being used and growing?
Yes. Do you want to take a first crack at that, Dean?
Yeah, well, certainly, like I hinted before, we see a lot of XML and JSON used in web services. So it is kind of the language of the web and the way data flows between your cell phone and the server and between different business systems. So that's certainly one area we see it used. Before, like, more on a more like wider context, or let's say a more traditional IT context, certainly XML has been used for years as an exchange format.
Yeah.
And JSON has picked that up as well more recently.
Yeah.
And so particularly because XML has really good validation built in.
Yeah.
We've seen it used a lot in that way. So things like City GML to move 3D city data between different systems, Inspire, and a lot of national mapping agencies have a flavor of XML, and they may be moving that to JSON as well. So that's kind of one area is where we've seen a lot of
and just expanding a bit on what Dean said, we see it in industry after industry as well. So when we think about, there's SIM, which is for the utility, the electrical industry. So we're seeing, this desire to have a vendor neutral way of moving data, right? There's lots of tools out there, but often you want to, sharing data becomes more and more important. You might have to share it with regulatory bodies, or you might just have, subsidiaries or other departments within your organization, or other tools from different vendors. And this ability to move the data into a vendor neutral format like XML, or based on XML or JSON, and SIM is based on XML, enables you to really move the data and share the data, and between tools, because we're seeing organizations more and more have more applications that are more focused, so they want to be able to pick best of breed tools. And so part of that is being able to move the data and share the data between them, and that's really where in another place we see XML and or JSON, and they're kind of so Dean, if I was to say to you, which one's better, XML or JSON?
I would just say, JSON's better because it's, stands for Java, and Java is like my coffee. So, but no, you get these bun fights. It's kind of like karate versus kung fu. Which one's better?
Right.
And you could say that JSON on the surface seems better just because it's more streamlined.
Yeah.
But there are applications where each shines. So JSON might be better for mobile devices.
Yeah.
For something where you need it really lightweight, but XML is easier to validate, and it's better for some more of the complex exchange formats. So things like Inspire, UK Ordnance Survey, and even the complex geometries that are supported in GML are a little tougher to do in JSON. I haven't seen a lot of, let's say, solid geometry modeling in JSON.
Right.
So, not to say you couldn't do it, but so it all depends on the data model and what you're doing with it, how lightweight you want your applications to be, or how rich is the geometry model.
No, good. And we are seeing, massive data sets. Initially they were, like City GML, which is based on XML, of course, came first. And then now we're starting to see duplicates, right? There's City JSON, which is, a JSON model to represent, these larger 3D systems. For sure, the language of the web is JSON. There are services that will return XML or JSON, but more and more JSONs become the standard. And now there's kind of that new one that's YAML, which is also
I think we had a question about that one actually. What about JSON and Open API versus YAML? Any thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, we're excited. Anything that has the word open, so we're excited about the Open API. That's obviously we build an integration platform, and so with Open API now we're going to be building technology that can use those Open API interfaces to help users of our technology embrace any web service, and the Open API can return the information about the web services in JSON or YAML. I would say YAML is probably the preferred approach when YAML's kind of, it's even easier to read. And now it's kind of interesting. The big thing about XML when we talked about in the early days is human readable. And yeah, it's human readable because it's text. So then JSON came around, and JSON it's a little lighter weight even. Initially didn't have schema, and people said it's even easier to read. And now that's kind of the thing we're seeing with YAML. It's even easier to read. It's less characters. It's and things like that. And it's certainly for configurations and how systems are set up and web service descriptions. We're seeing YAML being used. But the nice thing about YAML and JSON is there is a one-to-one mapping from JSON to YAML. That's actually pretty easy to do. So at this point, we don't read YAML, but it's not a ton of work, and you can expect that in the future we will. So
yeah. Well, on the text file reader can read anything, right?
That's true. We can read it with the text file reader, absolutely, Dean, and we could do some magic there.
But yeah, we probably will pull in a library or two and get a YAML reader there. Now, they're not quite equivalent, though. I mean, you were saying in terms of the readability and structure, there's a potential one-to-one mapping, but typically YAML is used more for messages, and JSON can be used for both messages and objects or features. So
absolutely.
I don't think we will start to see YAML as
data,
huge data sets, for example.
I would agree with that.
Not replacing JSON, in mass.
Yeah.
But there, a lot of it comes down to the application, and that's why I think FME is such a great platform. Is we play nice with all these different formats and services, protocols. And so you may have an existing application you need to support, and if YAML is the way to go, then we'll make a way to talk to that. I did want to mention earlier we talked about where it's used and where it's growing, and it's funny because you still see old proprietary binary or even structured text formats that are finally moving to some kind of structured text like XML or JSON. And obviously the binary stuff, the difficulty there is it may work very well. It's optimized for one vendor or one tool set, but can be hard to share with others unless you pass on a whole whack of libraries. And structured text, if it's not really a standard, then you have to communicate, well, the fourth line, 10th character in means this. You get one thing off, and it's very brittle. So I think that's why XML or JSON, they're both going to be around for a very long time.
Yeah. So we have a good question here from Mark. He says, we do not use JSON in our native software, but we need to read it from third-party sources. His experience with the format is minimal. So walk us through, Dean. Like if I'm working with, I get this new JSON file from a system I've never seen before. I have FME. What's the best way for me to start to, to understand it so that I can start to, ingest it or read it? What would you do the first thing? I give you it's called random.json.
Yeah. Well, I would, first of all, is it a web service or a file? And if it's a web service, I might just look at it in the browser and then maybe just download a snippet of it so I can play around, look at it in a JSON editor and just have a look for it. And the thing is if you might want to look at some of our tutorials so that you have some examples of different types of JSON and GeoJSON. And so if you find out that it has a bunch of coordinates in it, it might be GeoJSON. So you could just try reading it with a GeoJSON reader. And if that doesn't work, try JSON. Yeah. And the nice thing about when you have a file like that, it's a little bit easier. You can use the tree control to drill into it. And so you could add the JSON reader and open up the feature path mode and then pick an object that you want to read. And the trick there is you don't do select all because that'll select everything in the tree. You just pick one object. So typically what you'll have in JSON is an array. And so you might have a container thing called items or features. And within that, you have something called feature. So click on the thing, the single thing, not the plural, because if you click on the plural, you'll just get the whole array. If you click on the item, now you're going to get one feature per item. So that would be a good way to start. And if you get stuck, take a look at we have the JSON or the XML tutorials in there. If you kind of follow the pattern in there, we walk you through in detail how to use those tree controls and to read this.
Yeah. So So good.
Awesome.
So, yeah. So there's one about validating attribute names in XML. How can I validate attribute names? Does the attribute validator? I use the XML validator, and it will. And I say with select schema. Is that what would I do?
Yeah, there's really two levels of validation. You might want to validate that it is even valid XML to begin with. So, and we often do this. We do this even in our geometry validators, where you can have multiple stages of validation. There's not much point in throwing the data set for schema validation if it's not syntactically correct. So you can just do that XML validator, do a syntax check first. If that passes, then you just have to point the validator data set at the file, and then the application schema at the XSD file, and it will tell you if those properties or field names or properties, whatever you want to call them, are valid. Like,
right.
Are they part of the schema, or are they undefined?
Yeah.
And the nice thing about the XML validator, it does give you a pretty rich list of issues in terms of row numbers. So I would strongly recommend, investing. It doesn't cost anything actually in a good investing the time to install a good XML or JSON editor, not just Notepad. So if you install Notepad++, and I would recommend putting in the plugin for there's JS tools and XML tools. Those are two different plugins, and they will format your data and let you do things like basic syntax checking as well.
Okay. So here's somebody this is a longer question from Mike, but it's a good one. And I use the XML reader to read XML files for which I have a schema file. Can you point me to an example where the schema file is used? So he wants to use XML reading with the XSD. Currently, I'm not making use of the schema file, and I run into a couple of problems. First, I have to break up large files to prevent using up memory. And second, when I build the FMW, I have to use a dummy XML file with all the possible paths so I can reference everything in my FMW. I would think that using the schema definition would prevent me having to do this. So I think first of all, Dean, how do you tell the XML reader to use the XSD?
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, should I share my screen?
Yeah, you might as well. This is a quick one, but it's good for people to see. There's some, we can, yeah. It's a good one because we added XSD support probably in the last last 2 years, Dean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wait a second, just trying to get oh, there it goes. So it depends which screen I showed. It didn't ask me which one.
We can see your desktop screen.
21.2, and you got your HTTP.
Yeah, you got it. Okay. Yeah. All right. So I will pop up. This is one based on Beer XML. So if you want to read this based on application schema,
yeah.
I guess I could start this from scratch.
Yeah, just launch a new reader so they see the whole thing.
Yeah. So I'll just go to where that data set is.
A format that's near and dear to everybody's heart. Yeah.
Because
this is a format we don't natively support in FME, even though there's been some discussions that we should support Beard XML, but we don't.
Yeah,
okay, go back. You lost me, Dean. So under the format. So it's
if I type XML,
you pick XML.
I picked XSD XML because that is the. In fact, let me just go to the whole formats list here.
Yeah.
So if I type XML, there's quite a few that come up.
Yeah.
But
and that's actually a good point. I'll say something there. What we've done at SAFE for a lot of the common XML and GML and JSON formats is we've really tried to make it easy for the user by sort of wrapping these these XML with all the settings that really work. Many of them point to the XSD files underneath and things like that. We could have just had one XML format and then left it for all of you to figure out every time you're seeing a different XML, but that would be a lot of work, and especially with some of the complicated ones like AIXM, which is a really complicated. So as you see XML formats, do let us know, even if you're successful, because we might decide to let's just wrap it up like this. So and then the one that the key thing here is if you choose XML, then you're kind of out of luck, right? Then you need to choose XSD.
Well, you're not really using the application schema. So if you choose that, that's a very good, important point, Don, and thank you. Thanks for stopping me there before I flew through it, because sometimes I'm on autopilot. So in terms of how to read this, at the XML reader, you're basically reading it without the schema. You're looking at the structure. It's better than a text file reader because you are, XML aware. But you're just looking for structure patterns or paths within the actual XML data, and you're not using the application schema to interpret it.
That's right.
So we had XSD-driven GML for a long time, and we only recently added it for more broadly just XML. And to Don's point, when we have things like Inspire or AXM, we're not just when we call that packaging of a format, we're actually providing the application schemas as well as the feature paths to interpret the various feature types. So we're kind of doing that work for you, but there's a lot of times, let's say you may have some complex GML or some other complex format where our specific reader doesn't read everything. You could try reading it with the generic XML XSD reader or the generic GML reader. You might get more information.
Yeah.
So let's say if Kunta GML had a new version that we didn't update the schemas for, you could use the generic GML reader and probably get more information out of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm just going to go ahead and select XSD driven, and then I have to click on patterns here and find that schema path.
Yeah.
And so I just go into here and choose the schema. And now I'm looking at the feature paths. And here's where you don't do that select all thing. Some people see select all and how could all be bad? Well, then you're going to get a power set of all possible feature types at every level in that tree. So the big problem that we need to help you solve and make as easy as possible when you're dealing with JSON and XML, and you're trying to relate that to either relational or GIS, the problem there is going from nested to flat, and from flat back to nested. So underlying everything we're doing here, we'll often see that pattern. And so here, I've seen this schema before. I happen to know that here the trick is, see the S? That kind of implies that you got an array there. So you actually don't want the array object, you want the element object within it, or the item. So this is your items, and that's your item. So the clue there, and don't quote me on this, it doesn't always work, but it happens to hold true here, is go singular versus plural.
Right.
So that's why I'm choosing recipe, not recipes.
Right.
We wouldn't have to read all this, but
sure,
that's basically
what happened.
Do. And it's going to pull in, it's going to scan the schema from those feature types and drop them down. Yeah. And then you've got your beer recipe. You can start making beer.
And just expand each of those, Dean. Just click on like fermentables, just the down arrow, just so we see.
Well, it's running.
So then people can see, and this is all pulled, and there's all the attribution from that XSD. So, right.
Yeah, it's even pulling in the width and the data type.
Yeah. So that should that should help. Because before we had XSDs, you had to almost build all the possible combinations that you thought you would have, and then try to munch them together to try to figure out what you had. Whereas the XSD is really the way to go. Yeah. Yeah. So that should help that one. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, we do have a lot of great questions.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So we have
Okay,
another.
so what's next?
I'm gonna add. It's a one about you know, it's a SOAP request. So yeah, we can use SOAP we use SOAP, that thing from Smart Bear, SOAP UI, to help build your calls. But he talks about, you know, the data that comes back is XML, that has XML with child items. And so, you know, what's the best way to blow apart these child items? Yeah. So was that the XML exploder that you would use, or?
Yeah, well, normally you would use something like XML fragmenter.
Fragmenter, okay.
Yeah, I think we actually called it exploder, but you know, maybe you had trouble getting on a plane, so we changed it to fragmenter.
Fragmenter is probably a better name.
Yeah,
Yes.
it sounds less destructive. We don't want to like blow up your XML. So
Yeah.
anyway, yeah. So if the difference is, I think we had a question a while ago, flattener versus fragmenter. So flattener will flatten essentially the XML within one object, and fragmenter will break up. It can kind of do both flattening and break things up into multiple. So if we did, let's say here, I don't know if I have a list object here, ingredients, name.
Right.
If you have a very large piece of XML and you need to explode that out, I don't know if I have a fragment here.
Right.
Yeah, I could. I'll actually come up with a completely different workspace here.
Sure. And then a lot of great, you know, a lot of great requests for improvements from Francisco. So we really appreciate that. He would like the, you know, the tree view to be able to show the attributes underneath. That would be nice, you know, and you know, if you could have, you know, so that I'll make a note of that one. That's a good one. As you see the element, it's singular. It'd be nice to be able to hit a button and then see all the attributes that were actually underneath, you know, that entity, and then you could do things like even select attributes within one of those, and so that's great. Yeah.
So I'm just showing how powerful the XML fragmenter is. It's essentially like the XML reader in a transformer. So if you ever do need to read something, occasionally, here's a little trick. Sometimes you have bad XML or bad JSON. Maybe it's a fragment and it's not even valid. And then a lot of the JSON or XML tools won't even work with it. So you have to clean it up.
Yeah.
A really dumb thing sometimes I do with a bunch of JSON objects, if they're in an array, let's say XML. Sometimes in XML you've got a series of objects, and to be valid XML, it has to have a single root. So you can just prepend begin end tag XML root around a blob of XML and make it into a valid document.
Yeah.
So that would be a case where you use the text line reader to maybe clean up or reformat it and make it valid before you actually run it. But so the suggestion there was to make it easier to see what's inside the XML or what the child elements are.
Yeah, it's really it's a feature request more than anything, but it's a good one. So as you were, you know, even navigating your beer XML, it would be nice if when you picked, you know, fermentable or whatever it was, that underneath that you could select the attributes that you actually wanted to appear in the.
Oh yeah.
On the canvas, and that would just even make the experience. And of course, it would read all the others, but they wouldn't be, you know, they could be removed, or they wouldn't clutter your workspace. So that's a good one.
That's a good idea. Yeah.
Yeah. And somebody has a really interesting project. They want to convert an email that has headers and text below each header. It's JSON, and they want to use it to with automation to update a record when a particular type of email arrives. So that way, when we'd want to see the JSON, if a sample would be really, really great. It sounds like a great little project there.
Yeah.
You know, because
For
we've
sure.
done that with FME Server. Of course, you can have automations triggered when an email. You can watch a special email address, and when an email arrives, you can then pull it down, grab the attachments if there are attachments, process them, and then use them for processing. We have many customers doing that for things like, you know, you have workforces in the field who want to do QA. They collect data and then they use their email to send in the data file. Because the nice thing about email is, you know, sometimes in the field you're not always connected, and so but as soon as your device gets connectivity, the email goes out, so it works well. Yeah. So anyway,
there's one other thing I really wanted to show here, which is a usability improvement, Don. You'll
Yeah.
notice that if I use the XML fragmenter, since you brought that up,
yeah,
if I use that to drill into this data set and just pick out this addition object,
we can't
I
see
don't
anything.
get any schema.
I can't see anything.
Oh,
Hey,
I'm not sorry.
share your screen again.
Yeah.
Here, let me make you the presenter here.
I thought maybe it was just me, so you know.
No, good point, Don.
Okay. Can you see the?
Yep. Yeah.
So I've got this beer XML. I've drilled into addition. You'll
Sure.
notice I don't use the namespace prefix. I just use the stuff after the colon.
Yep.
And so I'm fragmenting based on addition, and I've set flatten to enable flatten.
And what did you
What
type
you
there?
get-
Did you type addition or colon addition, or what did you type there exactly?
Yeah, I just used addition, but I think I got that off the. I got that off the tree.
Yeah, that's right.
So yeah, not colon addition, just addition. But when I look at the feature, I get all of these interesting attributes,
Mm-hmm.
you know, about the ingredients that go into this beer.
Yeah.
But if I actually want to do attribute manipulation downstream, I'd have to manually like copy and paste that from Data Inspector in. But now we have this new ability in FME. I can just run this with feature cache on.
Yeah.
Enable feature caching, rerun it. Don't worry about the error state here. And it'll get that far. And then what I can do is I can just go into the attribute exposer and import from feature cache.
Yeah.
Now you go ahead and select all. You can go crazy and select all.
Yeah.
Now you got all of these properties on there.
Yeah.
You don't have to do any typing or copy it from the log or nothing.
Yeah, no, that's a good one, Dean. As you and I both know, in the past, you would have had to log the feature and then do a lot of typing. So
yeah, and now you can even have the automatic schema on your output.
Yeah, that's right.
And
then again, you selected all just because but you could have just picked the ones you wanted just as
or I could
So
pick
on the
everything.
XML fragmenter, does it have a flattening option? Did you? It does. Yeah.
There's a
So,
flattener.
and that's kind of an important thing, particularly, you know, you're going to relational systems often.
Yeah, just to be forewarned, that is off by default. I mean, we could flatten automatically, but we have to be a little bit careful because that can make for very large features depending on where you are flattening.
Yeah, that's right. And you can see it, you know, under the customize and flatten options and so. Historically, we did that because historically you would often use an XML fragmenter, and then right after it, you would always use the XML flattener. So,
well, here's another trick for those of us who are super lazy: is we can just go. I can select all and then remove all my XML stuff.
Yeah.
And that's less typing. But that's another good thing to do. Also, in your JSON is just keep what you need. So you could either have an attribute keeper or a bulk attribute remover. That will improve your performance a lot.
Yeah, because it actually, unlike the attribute exposer, which is just identifying the attributes that are there, so it's not changing the underlying work the engine's doing. The bulk attribute remover is actually removing those from all your data sets. So now every row is, you know, is smaller, right? So.
Well, this is the scary one, is the XML fragment, because if I leave that lying around.
Yeah. It can be huge.
I've got this. You got the whole like a big small object sitting in there, and those can get very large. So you don't want to keep millions of those lying around.
No, that's right. And so, yeah.
Anyway, that's I don't want to.
No, that's great, Dean. That's great. So let's see.
What else do we have for questions?
Okay. We do have a question that just came in. Is there a transformer or combination of transformers that can read and traverse XML columns from an enterprise database, such as SQL Server?
You would have to read the table with the XML column. So and then certainly then you would be able to use the transformers that Dean has been showing to then read them. Yeah.
Yeah, I would think the XML fragmenter should be able to work with it. I mean, the XML columns would just sort of, Don, wouldn't that just be kind of a flat form of XML?
Yeah, and some databases now, they do have a column type of XML, and whereas other ones might put the XML into just a blob or just a long text file. But there are databases there but what we've done with SAFE is rather we have our readers and writers, our databases support those formats, so they read it, but then we leave it as an exercise for using the XML fragmenter, flattener, or others to then rip that apart as needed. We don't want to do all the work because sometimes you don't want to actually be processing the XML. You might want to drop it, or you might just want to move it as is into another system. And so, yeah, but definitely follow up. We can, yeah.
Now, would that, I mean, yeah, in some databases, I wasn't sure that question was about like just a flat representation of the table, or if there was an actual XML blob, because we do see databases that store complex things like geometry
that's right.
as XML blobs. And so then you would probably want to do the SQL just to retrieve the attribute value, and then the XML processing on that attribute value. So you could feed that blob column into the fragmenter or the flattener, whatever you need to do.
Yeah, this one's from ArcGIS SDE, and they have coded value. They have domain field with coded values, and they want to be able to. That's in XML, so for sure you can read. We could get it.
Yeah, you would just basically get the path down to the coded domain, and that could just pull you. You'd make a list out of that.
Again, just a reminder, anybody, like, after this webinar, do reach out to support at safe.com if you want specific examples and things like that. We're really talking more about approaches on how to do it, and we can give you even more detailed solutions to this. But oh yeah, somebody's using 2017. They're about to upgrade to 2020. So lots of good. I'm not sure how much XSD driven stuff was even in 2017.
Not much in there.
Yeah, so there's been a huge amount of work done on the XML and JSON in that. So you're going to be in for a nice surprise there. Yeah.
And a number of new formats as well. And so again, when you get, as Don mentioned before, when you get the formats, they just kind of work out of the box.
Yeah.
And it's another thing worth mentioning, which not everybody knows, is that every single one of our formats, sometimes people say, oh, FME works with file formats, it doesn't work with, that's to say everything's web services. Well, actually, a format is just a protocol. And any of our formats, like 99% of them, unless there is a reader specific limitation, you can just put a URL as the source of our format.
That's a great point. Yeah.
You might have a URL that returns IMDF, and you just stick it in the GeoJSON reader and it can read it. Of course, you can also use it.
Yeah, that's a good point. So just to share your screen and show people, like, anywhere where you're asking for a data set, people are used to putting a file name there, but you can put FTP : if it actually exists on an FTP site, and FME will directly read it down. And if it's zipped on an FTP site, you could just put the domain there, and FME will actually hit the FTP site and deal with the compression as well of because there are some open government sites where they publish data via FTP, and then they might compress it using zip or GZ, and so yeah, so it's right on the data set there, and or HTTP or HTTPS as well. So like Dean has there, and again, that's all done by the FME infrastructure. So the GeoJSON reader itself doesn't necessarily know. It just knows, oh, I'm going to be getting this data. So yeah. So
yeah. So that was just an example of pulling in flood polygon from a GeoJSON URL.
Yeah.
And so we don't have to download it. You can just point the reader at it.
Yeah.
Or go through a feature
Which is
reader.
great because you might have data sets that are being updated all the time. And then you can, you could have a trigger that just reads this data, and then you're always getting the latest and greatest. So yeah.
Yeah. So this is from an actual. We have the tutorial called the Flood Warning Assistant. This is exercise 2. I think this is quite useful because we see this pattern quite often where you have a list of objects or even a list of capabilities, and embedded in that is so this is JSON. This is a list of floods, but just the properties of it. And then embedded in that is the geometry. And that's where I got that polygon link.
Yeah.
So this link is what, that returns the actual geometry, and then we can pull that into FME.
Yeah. So, so what do you think we run the second poll now, Elizabeth?
Yeah, that's a great idea. All right. So we're just going to launch that now here. Which of the following do you see important moving forward?
Yeah, and this can help us know where we should, put some effort. Okay, so YAML, yeah, Open API, interesting, yeah.
Seems like there's definitely one in particular in the lead so far here.
Yeah, JSON. So, yeah.
All right, give everyone just a few more seconds here. Okay, most people have voted, so I'll just close down the poll in a second. And share those results.
Wow, that's great. So Open API, that's a bit of a surprise. We're definitely aware of that. And the next version of FME Server, its APIs are available via the Open API interface, so you can query it with design tools. And on the FME side, that's something that we're in the early stages of investigating. What's the best way to make invoking Open APIs easier from within the FME framework? And that would be an authoring time thing that would sit on top of the HTTP caller, which is what we use to invoke any web service. And so, yeah, and JSON, that's good to know. Yeah, so.
Yeah, and just another word, Don, on
great things here. So, yeah, go ahead, Dean.
I was just going to say quick on Open API before I forget. The other thing that we are we're investing in is the OGC's flavor of Open API called OGC API. And so they have OGC Features API, there are sensor things, and there's all basically replacing a lot of the old SOAPy type WFS, WMS, WCS. All of that's being re-implemented according to Open API. They're calling that OGC API. So it's RESTful. A lot of it's JSON or GeoJSON, although you can request whatever encoding you want. Typically, you could request GML or GeoPackage if you want, but it's a lot more flexible, bringing things forward, a couple of decades into the current century in terms of IT infrastructure support. And so, yeah, Open API just to make things, to bring things up to date in a way that is more broadly integratable across the enterprise. But the OGC API really that kind of gives us that open standards focus to allow things to be very modular, so you can have different components plug and play together by open standards. So we did get OGC certification for GML, KML, GeoPackage, and a few other formats this last year. And so we certainly, and it's not just about OGC, there are other open standards out there, ISO and others that we are, things like metadata that we're looking to just make it more seamless and easier to work with using FME.
Yeah, yeah. So let's see what other questions we have there. Is there a similar flexible way to navigate in JSON as with XPath in XML?
Well, the feature path tree stuff works the same in JSON as XML. I mean, we did implement it for JSON a little bit later, but that's been around now for a few releases.
Yeah.
So, you know, when you have a JSON object and you want to drill into it, you can certainly do that in a similar way. I don't know if it's called XPath per se,
Yeah.
but yeah, you get the same type of nested structure. You just don't have to worry about things like namespaces.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit simpler.
Yeah, yeah. So as far as there's a question here, and I think the question is around data streams with JSON. There's that JSON format that is built for streaming. Was that JSON? Remember the name of that one?
Yeah, the JSON NL or something.
NL, that's right, for new line almost. That's how I remember it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. And so we have, let me just check it here, what the name of the parameter is.
Yeah, because of course, one of the things we're doing with FME, the platform, is now we're supporting more and more data streams, and data streams is a never end. You can think of it as like a database query where the answer never ends, because as the data keeps coming, the engine keeps processing it. But in JSON, of course, you want to make sure that when it's being read, it outputs it record by record. It doesn't wait for the whole document to be consumed or anything like that. So yeah, and JSON NL was the format that we've seen at this point, right, Dean?
Yeah, so I think with JSON NL, I know we can basically just read that out of the box, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's what I did. I just read it right out of the box. Yeah.
Yeah, because sometimes JSON, unlike XML, JSON can just show up as a big array.
Yeah.
And
right.
I think on our writer, I was looking for the parameter. There is a setting where you can choose whether you want to write it as like one feature collection or as a big array.
Yeah.
And oddly enough, there's a number of different implementations. I think they're all considered valid, but they may not all be compatible.
Right.
And so, you know, if you're finding your JSON output is not working as an input for someone else's client, you may have to check, are you writing out a single root object or are you writing out an array? That's one little troubleshooting step you might want to look at.
Yeah.
But yeah, like obviously if you're dealing with a huge volume of data and there might be a timeout, you don't want to sit there and read X 100,000 features and now you have to throw the whole thing away because you didn't get an end tag.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
That's why we have, you know, a lot of services will generate JSON NL.
Yeah.
And while we're on the topic, Don, there was a question I think that was emailed in that's kind of related. And it was about, oh, I'm reading JSON. I'm only ever getting 500 features back. And I know there's like 1 million features.
Yeah.
So that would be an example where you might want to take a closer look at that API. There's no limit in FME saying 500 is only the number of features. Don, don't you think 500 is enough features for everyone? We don't need more than that.
It would certainly make things easier if that was the limit. Like we've seen, you know, we see data sets with billions of features, right? Or
yeah, especially when you get to JSON or CSV. Yeah, so it's not a FME limitation unless you've set max features on your reader. You might want to make sure you haven't done that in some
I've done that once or twice and then published it and then, oh my goodness, I didn't turn that off. So yeah.
So the trick probably is there may be, when you don't say max features on your HTTP request, it might default to 500. The server might be doing that to protect itself. But if that's the case, then invariably there's probably a parameter in there where you can either say, this is my start and end feature, or this is the max features I want. So what you might need to do is generate a few hundred requests from 1 to 500, 500 to 1,000, and get chunks of data. That's usually the pattern we see.
Yeah, and often there's parameters on the call where you specify the page size, and it'll automatically just return 500 at a time, and so we can work with Thomas on that and take a look at that actual web service, see what the parameters are, but yeah. Because for sure, as Dean said, you wouldn't want to tell the poor web service, give me all 1 million features. The server on the other end would not be very, very happy. So there's going to be some paging you can specify where basically you specify your chunk size, and it feels like maybe 500 is a default or something, but you're only getting
a good number. I like 500.
Yeah. So we can help with that. That's a common thing. Yeah.
So I finally found that weird parameter I was talking about. I don't know if I need to share my screen, but
yeah,
it's not on the JSON writer, it's on the GeoJSON writer. And so the options are, and we only added this a couple years ago. You can either write a single feature collection object with all the features in it. You can write an array of feature collection objects. Or you can write an object with feature type names as keys. So there's 3 variations on GeoJSON. So that's specific to GeoJSON.
Yeah, and Francisco's asking a lot of great questions here. He says, do we have a tutorial on how to use the OGC API reader, Dean?
Well, the OGC API reader is pretty straightforward. That's a good question. We should probably, that's relatively new. It just came out in the last year or so. So we should probably have a bit of a landing page on OGC API. I'll make a note of that.
That's a good one. And he asks another good question, which I will take. It says, you should have a pricing model based on the number of features read. And I'm going to say we do. On server, it's not features read, but it's work done. Because, of course, the problem with features read is then what do you do with those features? You could read 500 features and then have a day's worth of processing, or you could read 500 features and just dump them out to a file, and those are different things. So on server, we have this CPU time-based pricing where you just pay for the work that's done, and it's CPU time, not run time. And so take a look at that. We call it dynamic engines, but we're seeing organizations embrace that. So then you're just paying for the work that's done, not paying for the amount of data read or the amount of processing that's done. It's kind of a
Don, if you really want to bill your customers by the record, you could probably figure out a way in FME to do
that. Yes, he probably could. Yeah. So, but that's a new way to price FME. That gives organizations lots of flexibility, and that's on server. Yeah. So good. So let's see here. Awesome. Anything else jump out to you, Dean, on all the questions?
Well, you just mentioned server, and I thought maybe you might want to mention a couple things that we've done on server related to JSON, things like parameters and in automations and automations writer, because the integration between desktop and server is really important. And I think how we package up those parameters, and maybe just as a note, it's maybe a big topic to cover, so we can't really get too far into server just in this session.
Yeah.
But anything like if you want to make your own web service, it's just a matter of publishing a workspace as a data streaming service that produces JSON or XML, right?
Well, that's right.
So that's another reason why we get excited about XML and JSON is anything that produces a data stream can now become a service on server. So
that's right. And then you would just define it as a streaming service, and anytime somebody hit that URL endpoint, they would get the data back as JSON or XML or whatever, any other format. And
then any parameters that you have as published parameters, those can become get HTTP get parameters on that URL.
That's right.
Which will change what the return response is. So
Yeah.
Just a footnote there to as a teaser that have a look at FME Server, FME Cloud if you want to use these things that if you're actually publishing something like you want to make your own open API service. Certainly, using a workspace to generate that data stream is a good place to start.
Yeah, and you can pass in query parameters, as Dean says, as published parameters, but you can also pass in any other body to the the website, the FME server, and the workspace then has access directly to those components of the request as well under URL, server URL parameters. So yeah. So
Right.
yeah.
So did you see another question there? We've got a few minutes left.
Yeah, we might have time for one more question before our wrap up here, if any stand out to you guys.
Of JSON where the reader does not return all the attributes if the values are empty. So there's one, Dean. Basically he's reading a JSON, but if the attribute values are empty, the attributes are not there. Of course, that's FME. You know, and that's the problem with this. That's the nice thing about an XML schema, is because it's going to show you when you pull them into FME, you're going to see all the attributes that could be there. Whereas when you're using JSON and you're authoring, and there's no schema, there's no way to know an attribute might be there, right? So.
Yeah, but if Don, if you use that attribute exposer, would it just basically make that as a column with a null value? I don't know.
It would, yeah.
Yeah. I think that, so the attribute exposure.
No, it wouldn't be, no, it would, you would be able to use it downstream, but the exposer doesn't actually add the attribute to the data underneath, yeah. So what you would have to do in this case, unfortunately, it would be like that earlier question where the fellow was trying to create all the, you know, the XML with all the different possible values as in one of the types. And so with JSON, unfortunately, you'd have to do the same thing at this point. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, that does get into JSON schema, because we have the same issue with XML reader versus XSD. I think if you write it with the XSD reader, you're going to get the columns because it's getting it from the schema.
That's
but
right.
If you read it from XML, that's a very good point, very good question, because one record, I've had lots of support cases where somebody says, oh, my X and Y values are missing. And well, just go to the next record and they show up, because it's not consistent across records.
Yeah.
So if we actually got, you know, I don't know, what do you think, Don? Is that JSON schema something we might want to look at?
Yeah.
Because we did have support for Jenkins.
Yeah. And that would be a takeaway from this webinar for us, would be, you know, that's why these are so great, is JSON schema. And also, you know, Open API was also something that is, you know, we wondered about that. So that's great.
Good.
Yeah. So I think we're at time.
We are.
So thanks everybody, and please do send. This has been fantastic, and please do send any further questions you have to support@safe.com, and we will make sure we answer your questions and help you, you know, get success. Or also, Francisco, thanks so much for, you know, all your requests.
Great questions.
Yeah, because those are totally help us be better, and so we're definitely, you know. Yeah.
And Don, I would say the XML or JSON challenge is still out there. So if there's anything, you know, you can't read, or anything you think is really gnarly, fire it our way. We'll show you how to read it. Have you ever come across some JSON or XML we can't read, Don?
No, you know, not now. I mean, it's been a long time. I mean, because with the tools we have, and the XSD driven was a huge thing that really made it a lot easier for us to turn those around. But yeah, if you see a gnarly one, send it our way and say, you know, I don't think you guys can read this XML or JSON. That kind of gets us in challenge mode, and then we can take a look.
Yeah. So there's some good links there and resources. I would strongly recommend the XML-a-thon webinar. If you did miss that, Don and I did that. What was that? About a year and a half ago. And that does cover, I think there's a bit of JSON in there too. Yeah. And a lot of the concepts that work for XML work in a similar way for JSON.
Yeah.
So that's a great one to start with. It also has XSD XML examples.
Yeah.
And then Kaylin did the new XSD driven reader writer tutorial. So anything with the word tutorial in it is a good place to start.
Yeah. And what else you got for us, Elizabeth, on this slide deck? What else you got for us in this slide deck that people should be aware of?
All right, so just before I move on from this slide, I will send out these slides to everyone post-webinar, so you'll have all the links, just to note that. And I did just chat out the XML webinar link for you all as well.
Perfect.
Perfect, thanks.
All right, so the peak of data integration, our 2022 UC, very exciting.
Yeah, so come to Vancouver. We're gonna, Dean and I will be there, and we expect 1,000 people, assuming that the world's traveling again. And at this point, it's it's hard to know which way we're going, but that's the plan. August 24th to 26th. That is the convention center right on the water in downtown Vancouver. It's a great time for talk about any kind of data integration. So yeah.
And who knows, Don, there might even be an XML or JSON workshop, eh?
I'm sure there will be. I'm sure there will be. Yep, absolutely. Yep. Yeah, and also the world tour. How many cities around the world this year, Elizabeth? Is it like 77 or something?
Yeah, more than 70. So I think, yeah, 77 sounds about right.
Okay. And adding more all the time. Yep. I'm making that up. But it's with our partners. We have amazing partners around the world. So, you know, go to our website, find a partner, and if you're outside of North America, lots of great stuff to have a day, a free day. Well, you pay for lunch, $25, which we give to a food charity. But yeah, and really great time. Yeah.
Yeah, we've got our full tour schedule posted, so definitely check that out.
Yeah, awesome. And yeah, look at that. You get a community badge for attending. So if you're part of our community, and our community is a great place to go to get questions answered. SAFE is on there. We watch all the questions go by, and lots of folks in the community also jump in. It's a great jump off point to our FME Academy, which is online training, all free, and the knowledge base as well. So it's really great. So yeah. And yeah. And our webinars, there's so many webinars we've done and continue to do. So, and they're all recorded. So safe.com/webinars. And so just browse that and you'll see all the webinars that SAFE's doing, but also our partners are doing. So I think on there, you're going to see one in the UK on, I'm going to say FME and local government. I'm going by memory, so but it's something like that. And so it's a great place just to check out all the upcoming and all the past demand webinars. And so really great resource. Yeah.
And I'll put in a quick plug. We're planning to do a city GML one in January. So
yes,
yeah.
January 27th. So definitely sign up for that one.
Nice, good way to start the year. Yeah.
Yes. Awesome. And before we conclude here, we'll just note, if you can please share your feedback with us on our webinar today, it really helps us improve our program. I think it's a 4 multiple choice question survey, so just take you maybe 20 seconds and it really helps us.
Yeah, and yeah, and thank you so much. Yeah, take care.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Thanks for all those great questions.
Bye for now.
Bye.